Hello world, Krista here with Books and Jams, and I'm here today to tell you all of the books that I read in the month of October. I had a fantastic reading month, I would say. I read 8 books in the month of October and I really loved most of them. There were just a few that were just okay, but overall I thought it was a fantastic month. I read 3 audiobooks, I did 2 buddy reads, and I read 1 nonfiction. Well, one of the audiobooks was nonfiction, and a few others. So I think it was a fantastic month overall. Let me just jump right in and tell you what I read. I started the month by listening to the audiobook of Mess and Moxie by Jen Hatmaker, and this was my nonfiction read of the month. I love Jen Hatmaker. She is a Christian speaker and writer. She and her husband pastor a church in Austin, Texas. I'm so glad I listened to the audiobook because Jen Hatmaker really speaks the language of sarcasm, which I think is so much better listened to or heard than read in print. She's just super sarcastic in a lot of ways in this book. This is a book about being a woman. It's for all women, for sisters, for mothers, for wives, for friends. The main theme, I think, of this book is that all of our lives are a bit of a mess, but us as women, we have a lot of moxie. So whether you're a parent or whether you are single, whether you're married, no matter where you are in your state of womanhood, this book has something to say to you, and it's just filled with a lot of love and with a lot of humor, and I really am glad that I read it, and I gave it 5 stars. My Goodreads read-along pick for the month of October was The Kitchen House by Kathleen Grissom. I believe I gave this 4 stars, although I think it could be 5. This book takes place on a southern plantation, and it follows an indentured servant girl, Lavinia, who was orphaned on a boat coming over from Ireland. It's a dual perspective. So we get the perspective of Lavinia from a child's perspective as she grows up over the years, but also from Belle, who is a slave in the kitchen house on this plantation, and Belle is the one who is tasked with kind of raising Lavinia. This book is filled with all of the worst of slavery. There is a lot of horrible situations in here. Families being ripped apart, child abuse in lots of different forms. It was heartbreaking to read. But I also love that in the midst of all of that, this girl, Lavinia, develops her own family. It's hard to say that I enjoyed reading this book because it was just so difficult. There are so many poignant and heartbreaking and frustrating situations that I found myself getting more angry than sad. It wasn't just a sad thing, it was angry that people honestly treated other people this way, and it just is heartbreaking. I did love the relationships that were in this story and the resiliency of so many of the characters. I love the way Kathleen Grissom wrote her characters. They were all flawed. None of them were perfect or rosy or all 100% awful either. There was a couple that were totally awful, but some that you kind of understand where they're coming from, but you don't agree with their choices. It made me think a lot, and I'm really glad that I read this book. And I would recommend it, but be prepared for some awful situations to read about. I finally read Redbird Box this month. This is by Josh Malerman, and it is a horror thriller. I read this as a buddy read with Robin from Driftless Reader, and also talked about it a bit with Brittany from Brittany Freakin' Reads. And I've also been talking about it with Kelsey from Hardback Haven. We didn't exactly read it together, but we did talk about it afterwards. This book, okay, so I don't read creepy books, you know that about me, but I really enjoyed this read. I had to read it in the daytime because it was enough of a creep factor that I did not want to read it at night, but it's super short, and I did read it in almost one sitting. I started it at night and then I was like, nope, gotta wait till the next day. So in this world, which is our world, there are these creatures that if you look at them, you go crazy and harm yourself or others or both. And so it's about this group of people who try to survive, and essentially about this woman named Mallory and her 2 kids who decide to try to move from the house that they had been living in to this other place that they feel is more safe. And it's about that journey, and also about the time when these creatures first started showing up and how this civilization got to this point. So many questions, so many creepy situations, a lot to talk about with the people that I read this with. So I'm very glad that I didn't read this just on my own, because it really brought up some good discussion. Josh Malerman whoa. I feel like I've heard this is going to be a movie. I'm not sure that I could visually put these images in my mind, but at the same time, I'm also kind of curious as to what a movie like this would be like. So I don't know. We'll see. Another buddy read that I did this month was Dark Matter by Blake Crouch, and this is another book that I have been wanting to read for a very long time, and I read this with Lindsay from Wandering Reader. This was another one that was really good to read with somebody else because there are a lot of scientific theories in this book that it was fun to discuss the plausibility of them with someone else. This is about a man named Jason who is a science professor at a college and lives life with his wife that he loves and his son. One night things happen, and when he kind of wakes up, he's himself, but his world is not quite the same. This is the story of him trying to get back to life as he knows it. So it deals with identity, and it deals with the choices that we make and how those choices affect everything else in our lives. It was seriously weird, but so interesting and such a quick read. I was in it. It was really good. I really enjoyed reading this book. 5-star reads, one of my favorites in a long time, and I'm so glad that I read it with Lindsay. Really good book. Yay! I continued on with my read through of the Anne of Green Gables series with Anne of Ingleside. This is book 6 in the series, and I would say that it was so far my least favorite. This one deals with Anne's children more than Anne herself. And each chapter is kind of like an adventure from one of her children. And they're lovely and charming, just like Anne is. But I was not as invested, I guess, in the story. So I'm still planning on finishing. I have 2 left to go. But I did only give this one 3 stars instead of 4 or 5 like I've given all the others so far. I'm glad that I'm reading it. I hope that I like the last 2 a little bit better than I liked this one. Another audiobook that I listened to this month is It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover. This is not a book that I would recommend to everybody. I enjoyed the reading experience for the most part. There is quite a bit of language, and the relationship took turns that I don't typically like to read about. I had heard a ton of people talking about this book, and I know Colleen Hoover is very well loved, and she just came out with a newer one that hasn't been getting as much praise as It Ends With Us had. I know a lot of people were really good about not telling the plot or what really goes on with It Ends With Us, and I will continue that in case you are interested in reading it. Just know that there is some language, there is some abuse situations that happen. Just be prepared and do your homework and see if it's a book that you're really interested in. It's definitely not one that I would highly recommend, but I did think the writing was well done. I did like the main character. She was very believable, flawed. Ultimately, I loved where her story took her. So there were some good aspects of it. I think I even rated it 4 stars because I really did enjoy the reading of it, but it's not a book that I would just recommend to everybody. The other audiobook that I listened to this month is called Before We Were Yours by Lisa Wingate. I heard about this from my friend Lisa at Brand New Book Smell. When I heard her talk about it and looked it up, I knew it was a book that I would love to read. It's a historical fiction set in Tennessee, I believe. This is a book that has 2 time periods, so it has kind of a present day time period about this senator and his family. I wasn't as invested in that part of the story. But then also it deals with this family who live on the rivers somewhere in Tennessee. This book also tells about the Tennessee Children's Home Society, which is a real organization, and Georgia Tam, I think is her name, who was the woman who ran it. And this adoption agency actually kidnapped children and was horrible. There was a lot of abuse and neglect, selling, child trafficking ultimately. When I first started reading the book, I wasn't aware that this was a real place, because it was just horrifying, the things that these kids had to go through. I did a little bit of research afterwards and just am sickened. I just can't handle it, especially when it's children. But the story was really well done. I really loved it. There was one part that was kind of confusing at the end as things kind of all come together. I wish that I had had the hard copy so that I could go back and reread that bit. I may have to get it from the library because I'm still kind of confused about one part of it, which I think is why I gave it 4 stars instead of 5. But this book was really very sad, very well done. I loved it. I could recommend it, but also be prepared for this one. And finally, maybe my favorite of the whole month, and I read some good ones this month, but I finally got around to reading Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. This was what I chose for my BookTuber Recommends jar for the month of October. Everybody I know who's ever read Mistborn has loved it. I'm typically not a fantasy reader that much, and I loved Mistborn. I honestly read it. It's like 700 pages, almost 650 or so pages. I read this in 4 days, I think. I flew through it. This month, I started my nanny job and I was able to read a little bit while at work. I also had a day or two that I did not substitute teach, so I was able to read all day during those times. I love the story that's being told. Ultimately, this is about a girl named Vin who is a thief in this city where the leader is the Lord Ruler, and there's this rebellion that's rising up that is trying to overthrow the Lord Ruler. When I heard other people talk about the magic system, I was kind of confused by it, but when reading it, it made a lot more sense because I was into the story. There was not one part of this that I felt like it was slow or that I wanted to skim through, which often happens for me with longer books. There's often a part that I feel is a little bit slow, but that did not happen at all for me with Mistborn. I was 100% invested in every page. So I'm looking forward to continuing the Mistborn trilogy with The Well of Ascension, which I believe is the next one, and I don't know when I'm going to get to it. Probably not until the new year. But I'm very glad that I read it, and I would love to chat with you about it if you've read it as well, and if you've loved it. I'm very pleased with all the books that I read in the month of October, and I would love to chat with you about any of these. There's lots to talk about with some of them in particular, even this one. Oh my goodness, almost all of them, there's a lot to talk about. So please chat with me down in the comments. I know many of you have read these as well because I've watched you on your channels or talked to you about them already, or you've recommended them to me. So please chat with me down in the comments. Be sure to give this video a big thumbs up and click subscribe if you haven't already so that you're notified whenever I post a new video. And I will be talking to you in another video very soon. Bye! My hair is going to be kind of shaggy very soon because I am growing it out. It's going to take forever and it's going to be bad. And I don't have a stylist here. I don't have a salon. Meh. I miss my lady in Massachusetts. Oh well, what can you do? It's just hair. All right, bye. Bye!